Hi, I'm Julie. When I walked into my brother Marcus's engagement party at the Springfield Country Club, I could feel the familiar weight of disappointment settling over me like a heavy blanket. The crystal chandeliers cast elegant shadows across the polished marble floor as guests mingled in their designer clothes, champagne glasses catching the light as they gestured through animated conversations. I smoothed down my simple black dress, the most formal thing I owned, and tried to ignore the way my mother's eyes immediately found mine across the crowded room with that look of resigned concern she'd perfected over the years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. There's our little hermit, Uncle Dave announced loudly as I approached the bar, his voice carrying that jovial tone that barely masked his disapproval. Still hiding behind computers all day, Julie? When are you going to get a real job and find yourself a nice man like your brother did? The bartender handed me a club soda with lime, and I managed a tight smile as the familiar chorus of family judgment began to swell around me. What none of them knew was that while they saw me as the antisocial disappointment who spent her days playing with computers, I was actually one of the youngest senior analysts at Northbrook Security Solutions, holding one of the highest security clearances in the country and working on classified projects that kept our nation safe. But tonight, surrounded by their well-meaning but crushing expectations, I felt like I was drowning in their narrow view of who I was supposed to be. I had driven the 3 hours from my apartment in Arlington, Virginia, back to Springfield, Ohio, with a knot in my stomach that had been growing tighter with each mile. The familiar suburban landscape of my childhood felt increasingly foreign to me now, like returning to a place where I'd never quite belonged. My navy blue Honda Civic looked out of place among the luxury vehicles in the country club's valet parking area, and I'd chosen to park it myself rather than hand over the keys to the uniformed attendant, who looked at my modest car with barely concealed disdain. Marcus had always been the golden child, the one who followed the expected path with precision and grace. 2 years older than me, he'd been the star quarterback in high school, graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State with a business degree, and now worked as a successful financial advisor at a prestigious firm in Columbus. His engagement to Rebecca Patterson, daughter of the town's most prominent real estate developer, was the kind of union that made our parents beam with pride and satisfaction. They'd found their perfect match in each other, two beautiful people who understood social expectations and thrived in the spotlight of community approval. I, on the other hand, had been the quiet, awkward kid who preferred books to parties, and spent most of my teenage years in my bedroom with my computer, teaching myself programming languages and diving deep into the fascinating world of cybersecurity. While Marcus was winning homecoming king and dating the most popular girls in school, I was discovering my talent for seeing patterns in code, for understanding how digital systems worked, and more importantly, how they could be exploited or protected. My parents had tolerated what they called my computer phase, assuming I'd eventually grow out of it and find something more traditionally feminine to focus on. The irony was that my computer phase had evolved into expertise that made me invaluable in ways they couldn't begin to comprehend. At 26, I was the youngest senior threat analyst at Northbrook, a government contracting firm that specialized in cybersecurity for federal agencies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. My days were spent analyzing sophisticated cyber attacks, developing countermeasures for nation-state actors, and briefing high-ranking officials on threats that could destabilize entire sectors of our economy. The work was challenging, constantly evolving, and absolutely crucial to national security. But try explaining that to relatives who still thought I spent my time playing computer games. The country club's main ballroom had been transformed for the occasion, with white roses and gold accents creating an atmosphere of refined elegance. Round tables draped in cream linens surrounded a small dance floor where a jazz trio played softly in the corner. The guest list read like a who's who of Springfield's social elite, mixed with Rebecca's sorority sisters and Marcus's college friends, who'd all followed similar paths into respectable careers in finance, law, and real estate. I recognized many faces from my childhood, neighbors and family friends who'd watched me grow up and formed their opinions about my trajectory long ago. "Julie, sweetheart, My mother, Linda, appeared at my elbow with that brittle smile she wore when she was managing a social situation. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her navy dress impeccably chosen, and her demeanor radiated the kind of effortless grace that had always made me feel clumsy in comparison. "I'm so glad you could make it. I was worried you'd have to work again." The slight emphasis on the word work revealed her ongoing skepticism about my career, as though my job was some elaborate excuse to avoid social obligations. "I wouldn't miss Marcus's engagement party," I replied, meaning it despite my discomfort. I genuinely loved my brother, even if I sometimes felt like we were speaking different languages. "Where is he? I'd like to congratulate him." "Oh, he's holding court over by the windows with Rebecca and her parents. You know how he is, such a natural with people." She paused, her eyes scanning my appearance with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent decades trying to improve me. "You look nice, dear, though I do wish you'd worn something with a little more color. Black can be so severe on young women." Before I could respond, my father Robert materialized beside us, his presence commanding in that subtle way that came from years of success in commercial real estate. He was still handsome at 58, his graying hair giving him a distinguished air that matched his expensive suit and confident bearing. "There's my girl," he said, though his tone lacked the warmth he reserved for Marcus. "How's the computer business treating you these days?" "It's cybersecurity, Dad, not just computers," I corrected gently, though I'd had this conversation countless times before. "The work is going well. We're handling some important projects that I can't really discuss." He nodded absently, his attention already drifting toward a group of his business associates near the bar. "Well, that's nice. Just remember, there's more to life than work. Your brother's got the right idea, balancing career success with personal relationships. Maybe you should think about joining one of those dating apps the young people use these days." The casual dismissal stung, as it always did. In his mind, my career was a consolation prize, something to keep me busy until I found my real purpose in marriage and family. The fact that I was genuinely passionate about my work, that I found deep satisfaction in solving complex problems and protecting people from threats they'd never even know existed, was incomprehensible to him. Success, in his worldview, was measured by traditional markers: marriage, children, social status, and the kind of career that could be easily explained at cocktail parties. I excused myself from their company and moved toward the windows where Marcus was indeed surrounded by an adoring crowd. Rebecca stood beside him, radiant in a rose gold dress that perfectly complemented her blonde hair and bright smile. She was everything a Patterson woman should be: beautiful, charming, socially connected, and utterly conventional in the best possible way. I didn't dislike her, but I couldn't relate to her either. Her concerns seemed to revolve around wedding planning, interior decorating, and the social calendar that would define their married life. "Jules!" Marcus spotted me approaching and broke away from his conversation to pull me into a warm hug. Despite our different paths, he'd always been genuinely affectionate with me, never making me feel like the disappointment our parents sometimes implied I was. "I wasn't sure you'd be able to get away from work. Rebecca, you remember my sister Julie, the tech genius I told you about?" Rebecca's smile was perfectly polite as she extended her hand. "Of course. Marcus is always bragging about how smart you are with computers. I can barely figure out how to update my Instagram, so I'm completely impressed by anyone who understands that stuff." "Julie works for the government," Marcus explained, his pride evident even if he didn't fully understand what I did. "Something classified and important that she can't talk about. Very mysterious and cool." "How exciting," Rebecca replied, though her tone suggested she found it more puzzling than exciting. "Do you work in one of those big government buildings in Washington? I've always wondered what it would be like to live in D.C. I was about to respond when my phone buzzed insistently in my clutch. I'd kept it on silent, but the vibration pattern indicated an urgent message from my secure work line. Glancing at the screen, I saw a text from my supervisor, Dr. Sarah Chen. "Level 5 incident developing. Need you online immediately." Sorry to interrupt your weekend. Level 5 was the highest priority classification we used, reserved for threats that could potentially impact national security or critical infrastructure. My stomach clenched as I realized that whatever was happening was serious enough to pull me away from my brother's celebration. I looked up to find Marcus watching me with concern. Everything okay, Jules? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm sorry, but I need to step outside and make a quick call. Work emergency. I squeezed his arm apologetically. I'll be right back. As I hurried toward the terrace doors, I caught fragments of conversation from the guests around me. Poor girl. Always tied to that job of hers. I don't understand why she can't just turn off her phone for one evening. Robert and Linda must be so disappointed that she can't prioritize family. The terrace was mercifully empty, the cool October air providing relief from the stuffy atmosphere inside. I dialed Sarah's secure line, and she answered on the first ring. Julie, thank God you're available. We have a massive coordinated cyber attack, targeting the power grid infrastructure, across multiple states. The signatures are unlike anything we've seen before, and it's escalating rapidly. I need you to get to the operations center, immediately. My mind instantly shifted into work mode, the social anxiety and family tensions evaporating as I focused on the technical challenge ahead. What's the timeline looking like? How widespread is the impact? 3 major utilities are already reporting anomalies, and the pattern suggests this is just the beginning. The attack vectors are incredibly sophisticated, using a combination of techniques we've never seen deployed simultaneously. We think it might be nation-state actors, but the digital fingerprints are deliberately obscured. I was already mentally calculating the drive time back to Arlington and the resources I'd need to analyze the threat. I can be there in 3 hours. Have you contacted other agencies? FBI, NSA, and DHS are all spinning up their response teams. But Julie, there's something else. The attack is using a specific type of encryption that you wrote your master's thesis on. Your research into quantum-resistant cryptography might be the key to understanding how they're maintaining persistence in the systems. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family saw my work as an incomprehensible hobby, somewhere in the country people were depending on my expertise to keep the lights on. I'll head back right now. Send me the preliminary report so I can review them. During the drive. Already done. And Julie, this is big. If we can't stop this, it could affect millions of people. I hung up and stood for a moment on the terrace, looking back through the French doors at the party continuing inside. The elegant scene of celebration suddenly felt incredibly fragile, these people laughing and dancing completely unaware that their comfortable world might be under threat. In a few hours, I'd be in a windowless room surrounded by monitors and urgent voices, working to protect the infrastructure that powered their daily lives. Taking a deep breath, I went back inside to find Marcus and explain that I had to leave. He was still surrounded by friends, but his expression immediately shifted to concern when he saw my face. I'm really sorry, but I have to go, I said quietly, pulling him slightly away from the group. There's an emergency at work, and they need me back in DC tonight. Can't someone else handle it? It's my engagement party, Jules. This is important family stuff. The hurt in his voice made my chest tighten. I know, and I'm truly sorry. But what I do, it matters in ways I can't explain. People's safety depends on this work, and right now, I'm one of the few people who can help solve this problem. Marcus studied my face, and I could see him trying to understand something that had always been beyond his grasp. You're really that important to them? It's not just some computer glitch they can figure out on Monday? It's not a glitch, Marcus. It's a deliberate attack on systems that millions of people depend on. And yes, unfortunately, I am that important to stopping it. He nodded slowly, still not fully comprehending but recognizing the gravity in my voice. Okay. Do what you need to do, but promise me you'll be careful. I hugged him tightly, grateful for his support even when he didn't understand. I promise. Congratulations again on your engagement. Rebecca is lucky to have you. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave, I caught sight of my parents across the room. My mother was speaking animatedly with a group of women, probably explaining away my early departure with some excuse about my demanding job. My father was deep in conversation with potential business contacts, completely absorbed in his own world of deals and connections. Neither of them noticed me leaving, which was somehow both hurtful and fitting. They'd never understood that my work wasn't just a career but a calling, that the skills they'd dismissed as antisocial hobbies had evolved into expertise that made me indispensable in ways they couldn't fathom. Tonight, while they continued their celebration, I'd be fighting an invisible war to protect the infrastructure that supported their comfortable existence. The drive back to Arlington passed in a blur of highway lights and urgent phone calls. Sarah provided updates on the evolving situation, and I found myself mentally cataloging the tools and techniques I'd need to analyze the attack. By the time I reached the nondescript office building that housed Northbrook Security Solutions, I was fully focused on the challenge ahead. The operations center was buzzing with activity, multiple analysts working at their stations, while large monitors displayed network diagrams and threat visualizations. Sarah met me at the door, her usually calm demeanor showing signs of strain. "Thank you for coming back so quickly. The situation is escalating faster than we anticipated. We've got partial outages in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and the attack is spreading to adjacent grid systems. Ohio, my home state, the place where my family was probably still celebrating, completely unaware that their power grid was under assault. The personal connection made the threat feel even more urgent." "Show me what we're dealing with," I said, settling into my workstation and pulling up the preliminary analysis on my screens. What I saw made my blood run cold. The attack was incredibly sophisticated, using techniques that suggested months of preparation and intimate knowledge of power grid vulnerabilities. But more disturbing was the encryption method being used to hide the attacker's communications. It was a variation of the quantum-resistant algorithm I'd studied extensively, modified in ways that made it nearly impossible to decode using traditional methods. "They're using my own research against us," I murmured, recognizing the elegant mathematical structures I'd explored in my thesis. "This isn't just nation-state level. This is someone who studied cutting-edge cryptographic theory and adapted it for offensive purposes." Sarah looked over my shoulder at the code patterns flowing across my screen. "Can you break it?" I studied the data streams, my mind racing through the mathematical implications. "Maybe, but it's going to take time, and I'll need to approach it from angles that most cryptographers wouldn't consider. This is theoretical stuff that's barely been published in academic journals. How long do we have? If the pattern continues, they'll have compromised the entire eastern seaboard grid within 12 hours. After that, the cascading failures could take weeks to repair." The weight of responsibility settled over me like a heavy cloak. Millions of people were depending on infrastructure systems that were under attack by adversaries using techniques derived from my own research. The irony was bitter. My family thought I was wasting my time on academic pursuits, while in reality, that same theoretical knowledge might be the key to preventing a national catastrophe. I cracked my knuckles and began typing, diving into the complex mathematical structures that governed the encryption. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd dedicated my career to understanding. The rest of the world faded away as I focused entirely on the elegant patterns hidden within the malicious code. Hours passed in a blur of analysis and hypothesis testing. I barely noticed when Sarah brought me coffee, or when other analysts gathered around my station to watch my progress. The attack continued to spread, but I was beginning to understand its underlying logic, the mathematical principles that governed its behavior. "I think I've got something," I announced finally, my voice hoarse from hours of intense concentration. "The encryption is based on a modified version of lattice-based cryptography, but they've introduced quantum resistance in a way that actually creates a vulnerability if you approach it from the right angle." "English, please," Sarah said, though her tone was hopeful. "I can break it, but I need to write a custom decryption algorithm that exploits the mathematical weakness they inadvertently created. Give me 2 more hours." As I worked, I couldn't help but think about the party I'd left behind. By now, Marcus and Rebecca's celebration would be winding down. Guests heading home to their comfortable lives, completely unaware of the crisis unfolding in facilities like this one across the country. My parents would probably spend the ride home discussing my inappropriate early departure, reinforcing their belief that I needed to get my priorities straight. If only they knew that their daughter, the one they saw as socially awkward and professionally unfocused, was working through the night to protect the very infrastructure that powered their daily existence. The lights in their house, the security systems that protected their neighborhood, the hospital equipment that kept their elderly neighbors alive, all of it was vulnerable to the attack I was fighting to stop. But they'd never know. Even if I succeeded, even if I prevented a catastrophic failure that could have affected millions of people, my work would remain classified, my contribution invisible to the world that benefited from it. I'd go back to being the family disappointment who cared more about computers than finding a husband. The algorithm finally clicked into place at 3:47 a.m. I watched as my decryption program began unraveling the attacker's communications, revealing command structures and control mechanisms that had been hidden behind layers of sophisticated encryption. Within minutes, we had enough information to begin developing countermeasures. "My God, Julie," Sarah breathed, watching the data stream across our monitors. "You actually did it. You broke their encryption. Now we can trace their command and control servers," I said, exhaustion finally starting to creep into my voice. "And more importantly, we can develop patches for the vulnerabilities they've been exploiting." The next several hours were a coordinated effort involving multiple agencies and utility companies. Using the intelligence I'd uncovered, teams across the country worked to isolate compromised systems and implement security patches. By dawn, the attack had been contained, and the affected power grids were beginning to stabilize. As the sun rose over the Potomac, I finally allowed myself to lean back in my chair and feel the satisfaction of a job well done. The crisis was over, millions of people would wake up to functioning power grids, and life would continue normally for those who would never know how close they'd come to a major catastrophe. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Hope your work emergency wasn't too stressful. Thanks for coming to the party, even briefly. Love you, sis." I smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness but knowing I could never explain what I'd actually been dealing with. He'd go to work on Monday morning, flip on his lights, check his email, and live his life without any awareness that his sister had spent the night protecting the infrastructure that made it all possible. But as I gathered my things and prepared to head home for some much-needed sleep, I felt a deep sense of purpose that my family's approval could never provide. This was why I'd chosen my path, why I'd dedicated myself to understanding the complex systems that kept our society functioning. Their validation would have been nice, but it wasn't necessary. I knew who I was and what I could do. What I didn't know was that within a few weeks, this night's work would bring me to the attention of people who could change everything, who would finally see me for what I truly was. Not the family disappointment, but someone whose skills were essential to national security. The call that would transform my life was already being planned in offices I'd never seen, by people whose recognition would matter more than all the family approval in the world. 3 weeks after the power grid incident, I was sitting in my cubicle at Northbrook Security Solutions, reviewing threat intelligence reports, when my secure phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The caller ID showed only a series of digits that indicated a classified government line, which wasn't unusual in my line of work. But something about this particular call felt different. "Julie Rodriguez, Northbrook Security," I answered, using the formal greeting required for all classified communications. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Colonel Sarah Mitchell from the Pentagon's Cyber Operations Division. I need to speak with you about your recent work on the power grid threat. Can you confirm you're in a secure location?" My heart rate quickened. I'd briefed various agencies about the attack, but direct contact from the Pentagon was unprecedented. "Yes, Colonel. I'm at my secure workstation. What can I help you with?" "Ms. Rodriguez, your analysis of the quantum-resistant encryption used in the attack has come to the attention of some very senior people here. We need to discuss your findings in person. Can you be at the Pentagon tomorrow at 0800 hours? The Pentagon. I'd driven past it countless times during my years in the D.C. area, but I'd never actually been inside. The building represented the pinnacle of national security operations, where decisions were made that affected the entire world. "Of course, Colonel. Should I bring any specific materials?" "Bring everything you have on the encryption analysis, plus your original research from your master's thesis." "And Ms. Rodriguez? This meeting is classified at the highest levels. You cannot discuss it with anyone, including your supervisors at Northbrook." After she hung up, I sat staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. In my world, Pentagon meetings were the kind of thing that happened to other people. Senior analysts, with decades of experience and political connections. I was 26 years old, had been working in cybersecurity for less than 4 years and had never even met anyone above the rank of major. I spent the rest of the day organizing my files and trying to anticipate what the Pentagon might want from me. The power grid attack had been successfully contained, and the vulnerabilities had been patched. As far as I knew, the incident was closed. But something about Colonel Mitchell's tone suggested this was about more than a simple debrief. That evening, I called my parents for our weekly check-in, a ritual we'd maintained despite the geographic distance and emotional gulf between us. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the forced cheerfulness she used when she was multitasking. "Julie, honey, how nice to hear from you. I was just telling your father that we haven't heard from you since Marcus's party. Are you feeling all right? You left so suddenly that night." "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with work. How are you and Dad doing?" "Oh, the same old routine. Your father's been working on a new development project, and I've been helping plan the Hendersons' anniversary party. Much more interesting than whatever it is you do all day with those computers." The casual dismissal stung, as it always did. "Actually, Mom, I've been working on some pretty important projects lately. I can't talk about the details, but they're related to national security." "That's nice, dear. I'm sure it keeps you busy." Speaking of which, Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Rebecca has a lovely single cousin who just moved to Washington. Maybe you could meet him for coffee sometime. Rebecca thinks you two would have a lot in common. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar frustration of being reduced to my marital status. "Mom, I appreciate the thought, but I'm really focused on my career right now. There are some big opportunities coming up that could change everything." "Opportunities are fine, Julie, but you can't marry your job. You're 26 years old, and most of your high school classmates are already married with children. Don't you want a family of your own?" The question hung in the air, loaded with all the expectations and disappointments that had defined our relationship for years. "I want to build something meaningful with my life, Mom. My work matters, even if you don't understand it. I understand that you're passionate about it, sweetheart, but passion doesn't keep you warm at night. Your father and I just want you to be happy, and we worry that you're isolating yourself from the things that really matter." After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment, looking out at the lights of Arlington and wondering if they'd ever truly see me for who I was. Tomorrow, I'd walk into the Pentagon and discuss national security matters with some of the most powerful people in the government. But, to my parents, I was still just the awkward daughter who spent too much time on computers and not enough time looking for a husband. The next morning, I arrived at the Pentagon 45 minutes early, wanting to leave plenty of time for security procedures. The building was even more imposing up close, its massive concrete walls and geometric precision radiating an aura of serious purpose. After passing through multiple security checkpoints and receiving a visitor's badge, I was escorted through corridors that seemed to stretch for miles. Colonel Mitchell met me in a conference room on the 3rd floor, a space that was both elegant and functional, with a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs and walls lined with military portraits. She was a striking woman in her early 40s, with prematurely gray hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming. I'm Colonel Mitchell, but you can call me Sarah. I hope the security process wasn't too overwhelming." "Not at all, Colonel. I'm honored to be here. Please sit down. Coffee? Water? You're going to need caffeine for what we're about to discuss." As she poured coffee from a silver service, I noticed that she moved with the precise efficiency of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. "Ms. Rodriguez, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the top secret level. Your work on the power grid attack has revealed something that has significant implications for national security." She activated a secure display screen and pulled up a series of encrypted communications that looked similar to the ones I'd analyzed during the attack. These messages were intercepted by NSA over the past 6 months. "They're using the same quantum-resistant encryption methodology that you broke, but they're discussing something much more serious than power grid vulnerabilities." I leaned forward, studying the patterns on the screen. "Are these from the same actors who conducted the power grid attack?" "We believe so, but that's not the most concerning part. Based on your decryption methodology, our analysts have been able to partially decode some of these communications. They're discussing a coordinated attack on multiple critical infrastructure systems simultaneously, power grids, water treatment facilities, financial networks, and transportation systems. The scope of what she was describing made my blood run cold. A coordinated attack on that scale could paralyze the entire country. Exactly. And based on the timeline references in these communications, we believe they're planning to execute this attack within the next 60 days. She paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Ms. Rodriguez, your expertise in quantum-resistant cryptography makes you one of the few people in the country who can help us understand and counter this threat. We need you to join a special task force that's being formed to address this crisis. A task force? I'm just a contractor, Colonel. I don't have the experience or clearance level for something like this. Your clearance will be upgraded immediately, and as for experience, you've already demonstrated capabilities that our most senior analysts couldn't match. The encryption you broke in 12 hours took our best cryptographers at NSA 3 weeks to make any progress on, and they still couldn't achieve a complete break. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the enormity of what she was proposing. What exactly would this task force involve? You'd be working directly with analysts from CIA, NSA, FBI, and DHS, plus liaising with private sector partners and international allies. The task force reports directly to the Secretary of Defense and provides regular briefings to the President's National Security Team. The President's National Security Team. I thought about my parents, who saw my work as an incomprehensible hobby, and wondered what they'd think if they knew their daughter was being invited to brief the President of the United States. There's something else, Colonel Mitchell continued. The leader of this task force is Dr. James Harrison, one of the most respected voices in cybersecurity policy. He specifically requested that you be brought onto the team after reviewing your work on the power grid incident. Dr. Harrison's name was familiar to me from academic journals and policy papers. He was a legend in the field, someone whose opinions carried enormous weight in both academic and policy circles. Dr. Harrison requested me specifically? He said, and I quote, "The Rodriguez analysis represents the most innovative approach to advanced cryptographic threats I've seen in 20 years. We need that kind of thinking on this task force." I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. Someone of Dr. Harrison's stature had not only noticed my work, but valued it enough to request my participation in a critical national security operation. When would this assignment begin? Immediately. We're setting up a secure facility in Crystal City where the task force will be based. You'd be detailed there full-time for the duration of the crisis, with your salary and benefits handled directly by the Department of Defense. And my job at Northbrook? We've already spoken with your supervisors. They're being briefed on a need-to-know basis, but they understand that you're being temporarily reassigned to a classified project of national importance. Your position will be held for you. The offer was everything I'd dreamed of professionally and more. A chance to work at the highest levels of national security, to use my skills in ways that could genuinely protect millions of people, and to be recognized for my expertise by people who truly understood its value. I accept, I said without hesitation. Colonel Mitchell smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. I hoped you would. There's one more thing, though. Dr. Harrison would like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the task force structure and your specific role. Are you available at 1,400 hours? Of course. Excellent. I'll have someone escort you to his office. And Ms. Rodriguez, welcome to the big leagues. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of paperwork, security briefings, and administrative procedures. I was fingerprinted, photographed, and interviewed by security personnel who asked detailed questions about my background, my family, and my personal associations. The process was thorough but professional, and I understood that they were simply ensuring I was suitable for the level of access I'd be granted. At exactly 2 p.m., I was escorted to Dr. Harrison's office, which was located in a different section of the Pentagon that required additional security clearances to access. The corridors here were quieter, the atmosphere more rarefied, and I could sense that I was entering spaces where truly consequential decisions were made. Dr. Harrison's office was surprisingly modest, with simple furniture and walls lined with academic books and technical journals. The man himself was in his early 60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a simple suit that suggested he cared more about substance than appearance. "Ms. Rodriguez, please come in. I'm Jim Harrison, and I've been looking forward to meeting you." His handshake was firm, his manner warm but businesslike. "I've studied your work extensively, and I have to say, your approach to the quantum-resistant encryption problem was nothing short of brilliant." "Thank you, Dr. Harrison. I'm honored to be considered for the task force. Please, call me Jim. We're going to be working closely together, and formality will just slow us down." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Before we discuss the task force structure, I want to understand your background better. Your master's thesis on quantum-resistant cryptography was published 3 years ago, but you've been working in practical cybersecurity rather than academic research. What drew you to the applied side?" I thought about how to explain my career path without revealing my family's lack of understanding or support. I've always been interested in solving real-world problems. Academic research is important, but I wanted to see how theoretical concepts could be applied to protect actual systems and people. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Too many people in this field are either pure theorists who don't understand operational realities, or pure practitioners who don't grasp the underlying mathematical principles. You seem to bridge both worlds. He pulled up a secure display and showed me an organizational chart for the task force. The team will have 12 members, drawn from various agencies and disciplines. You'll be leading the cryptographic analysis unit, which will be responsible for breaking enemy communications and developing countermeasures. Leading a unit. I was going to be in charge of other analysts, people who were probably older and more experienced than I was. "Dr. Harrison, I'm flattered, but I'm not sure I have the management experience to lead a team at this level." "Julie, can I call you Julie?" Management experience is less important than technical expertise and innovative thinking. The people on your team are all competent professionals who know how to do their jobs. What they need is someone who can see patterns they might miss, who can approach problems from angles they haven't considered. He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "I'm going to be frank with you. The threat we're facing is unlike anything we've encountered before. The adversaries are using techniques that are years ahead of our current defensive capabilities. We need people who can think outside conventional frameworks, who can develop novel solutions to unprecedented problems. I understand. I'll do everything I can to live up to your expectations." "I'm not worried about that. What I am concerned about is whether you're prepared for the pressure and visibility that comes with this role. The task force will be briefing senior officials regularly, including cabinet-level meetings and potentially presidential briefings. Are you comfortable with that level of exposure?" I thought about the family gatherings where I'd been dismissed and overlooked, where my achievements had been minimized or ignored. "I'm comfortable with being judged on my work, Dr. Harrison. That's all I've ever wanted." "Good. Because if we're successful in stopping this attack, there will be recognition and career opportunities that could transform your professional trajectory. And if we fail—" He paused, the implications hanging in the air. "Well, failure isn't an option." The meeting continued for another hour, covering technical details and operational procedures. Dr. Harrison introduced me to several other task force members via secure video conference, including analysts from CIA and NSA who would be working closely with my cryptographic unit. They were all impressive professionals, but I noticed that several of them seemed surprised by my age and relatively junior status. "Don't worry about proving yourself to them," Dr. Harrison said after the video conference ended. "Your work speaks for itself. They'll come around once they see what you can do." As I prepared to leave, he handed me a thick folder, marked with the highest security classifications. "This contains everything we know about the threat so far. Study it tonight, and we'll reconvene tomorrow morning to begin operational planning." "Dr. Harrison, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you choose me for this?" "There are senior analysts at NSA and CIA who have been working on similar problems for decades." He smiled, removing his glasses to clean them thoughtfully. "Julie, I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've learned that the most important breakthroughs often come from people who haven't been told what's impossible. You looked at that encryption and saw possibilities that more experienced analysts missed because they were constrained by conventional thinking." He put his glasses back on, his expression becoming more serious. "But there's something else. The enemy we're facing is using our own academic research against us, taking theoretical concepts and weaponizing them in ways we never anticipated. To defeat them, we need someone who understands both the theory and its potential applications. You're one of the few people in the country who has that combination of knowledge. As I left the Pentagon that afternoon, carrying the classified folder and my new security credentials, I felt a sense of purpose and validation that I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my life, people who truly understood my field were recognizing my capabilities and trusting me with responsibilities that matched my skills. That evening, I called my parents again, wanting to share some version of my good news without violating security protocols. Mom, I wanted to let you know that I've been selected for a special project at work. It's a significant promotion and a great opportunity. That's nice, dear. More computer work, I assume? It's a leadership role, Mom. I'll be managing a team of analysts on a project that's considered very important. Well, that sounds promising. Will it pay more? Yes, substantially more. But more importantly, it's the kind of work that could really make a difference. I'm glad you're happy with it, Julie. Just remember what I said about balance. Career success is meaningless if you don't have someone to share it with. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, looking at the classified folder I couldn't discuss with anyone. Tomorrow, I'd begin working on a problem that could affect the security of the entire nation. I'd be leading a team of experienced professionals, briefing senior officials, and using my skills to protect millions of people. But to my parents, I was still just the daughter who spent too much time on computers and not enough time looking for a husband. The irony was almost amusing if it weren't so painful. I opened the classified folder and began reading, immersing myself in the technical details of the threat we were facing. The encrypted communications were even more sophisticated than I'd initially realized, and the scope of the planned attack was genuinely terrifying. But as I studied the patterns and structures, I began to see possibilities, weaknesses that could be exploited, approaches that hadn't been attempted. This was what I'd been trained for, what I'd dedicated my career to understanding. And finally, I was working with people who recognized that training for what it was. Not a hobby or a phase, but expertise that could save lives and protect the nation. The next few weeks would test everything I'd learned and push me to the limits of my abilities. But for the first time in my life, I felt truly ready for the challenge ahead. The secure facility in Crystal City was a revelation. Located in an unmarked building that looked like any other corporate office complex, it housed some of the most advanced cybersecurity equipment I'd ever seen. The task force had been allocated 3 floors, with my cryptographic analysis unit occupying the entire 2nd floor. Banks of quantum computers hummed quietly in climate-controlled rooms, while massive displays showed real-time threat data from around the globe. My team consisted of 8 analysts, each with specialized expertise in different aspects of cryptographic analysis. Dr. Amanda Chen from MIT specialized in lattice-based cryptography, while Major Tom Bradley from the Army brought operational experience from military cyber operations. Sarah Kim from Google had developed some of the most advanced machine learning algorithms for pattern recognition, and Dr. Michael Torres from Stanford was one of the world's leading experts on quantum computing applications. The first week was intense as we worked to establish protocols and divide responsibilities. I found myself in the strange position of being the youngest person in the room, while also being the team leader. Several of my team members were clearly skeptical about my appointment, particularly Major Bradley, who had 20 years of military experience and seemed to view my civilian background with suspicion. "I understand you've done some impressive work on the power grid incident," he said during our first team meeting, his tone carefully neutral. "But coordinating a multi-agency response to a national security threat requires a different skill set than individual analysis work." I met his gaze steadily, recognizing the challenge in his words. "You're absolutely right, Major. This is a team effort, and I'm counting on your operational experience to help us translate our technical findings into actionable intelligence. My role is to ensure we're approaching the cryptographic challenges with the right methodologies." Dr. Chen leaned forward in her chair. "Julie, I've reviewed your work on the quantum-resistant encryption, and I have to say, your approach was genuinely innovative. The way you identified the mathematical vulnerability in their implementation was something none of us at NSA had considered." "Thank you, Dr. Chen. But I want to be clear that I don't expect to have all the answers. This threat is more sophisticated than anything we've encountered before, and it's going to require all of our expertise working together. Over the following days, we began to develop a comprehensive understanding of the adversary's capabilities. The intercepted communications revealed a level of planning and coordination that suggested a well-funded, highly skilled organization with access to cutting-edge technology. They weren't just using quantum-resistant encryption, they were developing entirely new cryptographic methods that combined multiple mathematical approaches in ways that had never been attempted. "Look at this," Sarah Kim said, highlighting a section of code on her screen. "They're using a hybrid approach that combines lattice-based cryptography with elliptic curve methods, but they've modified the underlying mathematical structures in ways that make traditional cryptanalysis almost impossible." I studied the patterns she was showing me, my mind racing through the implications. It's not just mathematical innovation, they're thinking about cryptography as a dynamic system rather than a static problem. Each message uses a slightly different encryption method, making it nearly impossible to develop a consistent attack strategy. Dr. Torres looked up from his quantum computer terminal. "That's what makes this so dangerous. Even if we break one message, that success doesn't necessarily help us with the next one. They've essentially created a cryptographic system that evolves in real time." The technical challenge was fascinating, but the time pressure was enormous. Our intelligence indicated that the attack was planned for some time in the next 40 days, and we still hadn't made significant progress in understanding their operational timeline or target selection. Each day that passed brought us closer to a potential catastrophe. During my second week on the task force, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Harrison's assistant informed me that General Patricia Webb, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, wanted to meet with me personally. General Webb was a legend in military circles, one of the highest-ranking women in the Pentagon, and someone whose opinions carried enormous weight in national security policy. Her office was located in the most secure section of the Pentagon, requiring multiple security clearances to access. General Webb was in her late 50s, with silver hair and a bearing that commanded immediate respect. She was reviewing a file when I entered, and I noticed that it contained my personnel records and security clearances. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Her voice was crisp and professional, but not unfriendly. "I wanted to meet with you personally because your work has come to the attention of some very senior people in this administration." "I'm honored, General. I've been briefed on your progress with the task force, and I have to say, the approach you're taking is exactly what we need. Dr. Harrison speaks very highly of your leadership abilities and technical expertise." She closed the file and leaned back in her chair. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to speak frankly with you. The threat we're facing has the potential to cause more damage to our national infrastructure than any foreign attack since Pearl Harbor. If these adversaries succeed in their coordinated strike, we could see widespread power outages, financial system failures, and transportation disruptions that could last for months." The gravity in her voice made my stomach clench. "General, my team is working around the clock to understand their capabilities and develop countermeasures. I know, and your efforts are appreciated. But I need you to understand something else. If we're successful in stopping this attack, there will be recognition at the highest levels of government. The President himself has been briefed on your work, and there are people in this administration who believe you represent the future of cybersecurity leadership. The President knew about my work. I thought about my parents, who saw my career as an incomprehensible hobby, and wondered what they'd think if they knew their daughter's analysis was being discussed in the Oval Office. General, I'm committed to doing everything I can to stop this threat. That's the only recognition I need." She smiled for the first time during our meeting. "That's exactly the kind of response I hoped to hear. But Ms. Rodriguez, I want you to start thinking beyond this immediate crisis. When this is over, assuming we're successful, there will be opportunities for you to take on larger roles in national security. The kind of positions that could allow you to shape policy and strategy for years to come." After leaving General Webb's office, I felt a mix of excitement and terror. The stakes were higher than I'd fully understood, and the potential consequences of failure were almost too enormous to contemplate. But at the same time, I was being recognized at levels I'd never imagined possible. That evening I called Marcus, needing to talk to someone who knew me before I became involved in classified national security operations. "Jules, how's the new job going? Mom said you got some kind of promotion." "It's going well, Marcus, really well. I can't discuss the details, but it's exactly the kind of work I've always wanted to do." "That's great. You sound different, more confident or something. Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "Yeah, I think I am. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "I'm glad. You deserve to be recognized for how smart you are. I've always known you were destined for big things, even if Mom and Dad didn't always see it." His words meant more to me than he could know. Despite our different paths, Marcus had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. The third week brought a breakthrough. Sarah Kim's machine learning algorithms had identified subtle patterns in the encrypted communications that suggested a specific timeline for the attack. The messages showed increased activity around certain dates, and cross-referencing with intelligence from other sources, we began to develop a clearer picture of their operational planning. "I think they're planning to strike during the week of November 15th, I announced during our morning briefing. The communication patterns show a significant spike in activity leading up to that date, followed by radio silence. Dr. Chen looked up from her analysis. "That's only 3 weeks away. Are we going to be ready?" "We have to be," I replied, "but I think we're closer to a solution than we realize." The pattern analysis has revealed something important about their encryption methodology. I activated the main display screen and showed the team the mathematical structures I'd been working on. They're using a rotating encryption key system, but the rotation follows a predictable mathematical sequence. If we can identify the underlying algorithm, we might be able to predict future encryption keys. Major Bradley leaned forward, his skepticism finally giving way to genuine interest. "You're talking about breaking their encryption before they even send the messages?" "Exactly. Instead of trying to decrypt each message individually, we could potentially intercept and decode their communications in real time." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If we could achieve real-time decryption, we wouldn't just be able to understand their past communications. We could potentially prevent the attack entirely by intercepting their operational commands. "How long would it take to develop this capability?" Dr. Harrison asked. He'd been quietly observing our discussion, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. "With the full resources of this task force, maybe 10 days. But it would require round-the-clock work and perfect coordination between all our team members." "You have whatever resources you need," he said immediately. This could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. The next 10 days were the most intense of my professional life. We worked in shifts around the clock, with team members sleeping in makeshift quarters set up in the facility. I found myself coordinating not just my own team, but analysts from CIA, NSA, and FBI who were providing supporting intelligence and technical resources. The work was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. This was the kind of problem I dreamed of solving, a challenge that required every skill I'd developed and pushed me to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood the significance of what we were doing and valued my contributions. On the 8th day, we achieved our first successful real-time decryption. Sarah Kim's algorithms had identified the mathematical sequence governing their encryption rotation, and Dr. Torres had configured the quantum computers to process the decryption in parallel. When the first intercepted message appeared on our screens in plain text, the entire room erupted in celebration. "We did it," Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with amazement. "We actually did it." But the celebration was short-lived. The decrypted message contained operational details that confirmed our worst fears. The attack was scheduled for November 16th. Exactly 1 week away, and the scope was even more extensive than we'd initially believed. They were planning to strike 23 different infrastructure targets simultaneously, creating a cascade of failures that could cripple the entire eastern seaboard. "This is it," Major Bradley said, his military training taking over. "We need to brief the Secretary of Defense immediately." The emergency briefing was held in the Pentagon's most secure conference room, with attendees including the Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, and representatives from every major intelligence agency. I found myself presenting technical details to some of the most powerful people in the government, explaining cryptographic concepts to officials who would be making decisions that could affect millions of lives. "Ms. Rodriguez," the Secretary of Defense said after I'd finished my presentation, "are you confident in your team's ability to maintain real-time decryption capabilities during the expected attack window?" "Yes, sir. We've tested the system extensively, and we're confident we can intercept and decode their operational communications as they're transmitted." "And what about countermeasures? Can we not only intercept their communications but also disrupt their operations?" I glanced at Dr. Harrison, who nodded encouragingly. "Sir, we've identified several potential approaches. If we can maintain real-time access to their communications, we might be able to inject false commands into their network, essentially turning their own coordination system against them." The room was silent as the officials absorbed this information. Finally, the Director of National Intelligence spoke up. "Ms. Rodriguez, what you're describing sounds like something out of science fiction. Are you certain this is technically feasible?" "I understand the skepticism, sir. But the mathematical principles are sound, and we've successfully demonstrated the core capabilities. The biggest challenge will be operational coordination during the actual attack." The Secretary of Defense looked around the room at his senior staff. "Ladies and gentlemen, it sounds like we have a plan. Ms. Rodriguez, your team will have full operational authority during the attack window. Whatever resources you need, you'll have them." As the meeting concluded, General Webb approached me privately. "Ms. Rodriguez, I want you to know that what you've accomplished here is remarkable. Regardless of the outcome next week, you've already proven yourself as one of the most capable analysts in the intelligence community." "Thank you, General. But we haven't succeeded yet. Next week will be the real test. I have complete confidence in you and your team. And Ms. Rodriguez? After this is over, we're going to have a very interesting conversation about your future." That evening, I sat in my apartment, looking out at the lights of Washington, D.C., and thinking about the events that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I was a junior analyst at a government contracting firm, dismissed by my family as someone who spent too much time on computers. Now I was leading a task force that could determine the fate of the nation's critical infrastructure. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my mother, calling for our weekly check-in. "Julie, you sound tired. Are you taking care of yourself?" "I'm fine, Mom. Just working on an important project." "You're always working on important projects, dear. Sometimes I wonder if you remember that there's a world outside of those computers." I looked at the classified documents spread across my dining table, at the secure laptop that connected me to systems protecting millions of people, at the recognition letters I'd received from senior officials that I could never show to anyone. "Mom, I know you worry about me, but I want you to know that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The work I'm doing, it really does matter." "I'm sure it does, sweetheart. I just hope you're not sacrificing your personal happiness for your career." After we hung up, I realized that I'd never felt more personally fulfilled in my life. The recognition, the responsibility, the chance to use my skills to protect people. This was what I'd been working toward my entire career. And in 1 week, I'd find out if all that preparation had been enough. The countdown to November 16th had begun, and everything I'd worked for was about to be put to the ultimate test. November 16th arrived with the kind of crisp autumn morning that would normally have been perfect for a quiet walk through the Arlington neighborhoods I'd grown to love. Instead, I was in the secure facility at 4:30 a.m., surrounded by the quiet hum of servers and the soft glow of monitors that had become my entire world. The task force had been operating in crisis mode for 72 hours straight, and the exhaustion was beginning to show on everyone's faces. The real-time decryption system was functioning flawlessly, providing us with an unprecedented window into the adversary's operational communications. What we were seeing was both terrifying and oddly beautiful in its complexity. The attack was unfolding with the precision of a symphony, each component timed to create maximum disruption when combined with the others. First phase initiating now. Dr. Chen announced from her workstation, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what we were witnessing. They're beginning reconnaissance probes on the New York power grid infrastructure. I studied the decrypted communications flowing across my screens, watching as the attackers methodically tested the defenses of their primary targets. Their approach was methodical and patient, each probe designed to gather intelligence without triggering the automated security systems that most organizations relied on for protection. Sarah, are you seeing the same pattern recognition signatures we identified in the simulation? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Sarah Kim looked up from her machine learning algorithms, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards simultaneously. Confirmed. The attack vectors are following the exact sequence we predicted. They're moving through the infrastructure mapping phase exactly as our models suggested they would. Major Bradley was coordinating with Military Cyber Command, his years of operational experience evident in the calm efficiency with which he managed the multi-agency response. Pentagon CyberOps confirms they're ready to implement countermeasures on your signal, Julie. NSA and CIA assets are in position to execute the communication disruption protocol. The weight of command settled on my shoulders like a physical presence. In the next few hours, decisions I made would determine whether millions of Americans would have power, clean water, and functioning financial systems. The responsibility was overwhelming, but also strangely clarifying. This was the moment everything in my career had been building toward. Dr. Torres, what's the status on the quantum computer arrays? I asked, checking the complex calculations that would govern our ability to inject false commands into the enemy network. All systems operating at peak efficiency, he replied, his attention focused on the quantum state readouts that looked like abstract art to anyone without advanced training in quantum mechanics. The encryption injection protocols are ready to deploy, and we've got backup systems online in case of primary system failure. The morning hours passed in a blur of intercepted communications, tactical decisions, and coordination with agencies across the government. By 10 a.m., we had confirmed that the attackers were moving into the second phase of their operation, beginning to establish persistent access to critical systems while remaining undetected by conventional security measures. "This is incredible," Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. "They're not just attacking the systems. They're learning and adapting in real time. Every defensive measure they encounter is being analyzed and countered almost immediately." I watched the data streams, recognizing the elegant mathematical principles underlying their approach. They're treating this like a living system, rather than a static target. Each component of their attack is designed to support and protect the others, creating a network effect that makes it exponentially more difficult to defend against. The encrypted communications revealed something else that made my stomach clench with anxiety. The attackers weren't just focused on causing immediate damage. They were planning to maintain long-term access to critical systems, potentially allowing them to launch additional attacks at any time in the future. "Major Bradley, we need to modify our counterstrike strategy," I said, my mind racing through the implications. They're not just planning a single coordinated attack. They're trying to establish permanent footholds in our infrastructure. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his military training immediately focusing on the strategic implications. "We need to let them think they're succeeding while we map their entire network. If we can identify all their access points and communication channels, we might be able to eliminate their capabilities entirely rather than just defending against this specific attack." The suggestion was risky, potentially allowing the attackers to inflict some damage in the short term while we worked to eliminate their long-term capabilities. But it was also an opportunity to end this threat permanently, rather than simply postponing it. Dr. Harrison, who had been quietly observing our operations from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Julie, you're talking about a significant gamble. Are you confident we can maintain control of the situation if we allow them to penetrate deeper into our systems?" "I believe so, sir, but I need approval from the highest levels before we implement this strategy." Within minutes, we were connected to the Pentagon's Emergency Command Center, where senior officials were monitoring our progress in real time. The secure video conference included General Webb, the Secretary of Defense, and several other officials whose faces I recognized from classified briefings. "Ms. Rodriguez, General Webb's voice came through the encrypted communication system. Explain your proposed modification to the defensive strategy. I took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the course of our response. General, the attackers are implementing a multi-layered approach that includes long-term persistence mechanisms. If we simply defend against their immediate attack, we'll be vulnerable to future operations using the same infrastructure. And your alternative? We allow them to establish their initial access while we use our real-time decryption capabilities to map their entire network. Once we have complete visibility into their operations, we can execute a coordinated counterstrike that eliminates their capabilities entirely. The video conference fell silent as the officials considered the implications. Finally, the Secretary of Defense spoke up. Ms. Rodriguez, you're asking us to potentially allow some infrastructure damage in order to eliminate a long-term threat. What's your assessment of the immediate risk? Sir, based on our intelligence, the initial attack phase is designed to establish access rather than cause immediate damage. We believe we can contain the immediate impact while gathering the intelligence necessary for a complete resolution. And if you're wrong, the question hung in the air, carrying the weight of potential consequences that could affect millions of lives. Sir, if I'm wrong, the damage will be significant. But if we don't address the long-term threat, we'll be facing this same situation repeatedly, with increasingly sophisticated attacks. General Webb's image leaned forward on the screen. Ms. Rodriguez, I want you to understand something. If we approve this strategy and it fails, the responsibility will fall primarily on your shoulders. Are you prepared for that level of accountability? I thought about my parents, who saw my work as an incomprehensible hobby, and wondered what they'd think if they knew their daughter was making decisions that could affect the entire nation. Yes, General. I'm prepared for that responsibility. Then you have authorization to proceed. But Ms. Rodriguez will be monitoring every aspect of this operation. If the situation deteriorates beyond acceptable parameters, we'll immediately revert to conventional defensive measures. As the video conference ended, I felt the full weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. The next few hours would determine whether I was a visionary leader who had helped eliminate a critical threat to national security, or someone whose miscalculation had led to catastrophic infrastructure failures. All right, team, I said, turning to address the analysts who had been working alongside me for weeks. We're implementing the modified strategy. Sarah, I need your algorithms to track every communication channel they establish. Dr. Torres, prepare the quantum systems for a coordinated counterstrike. Major Bradley, coordinate with all agencies to ensure they're ready for simultaneous operations. The afternoon unfolded with the surreal quality of watching a disaster in slow motion, while simultaneously orchestrating a response. The attackers continued their methodical penetration of critical systems, believing they were operating undetected while we monitored their every move. Each successful intrusion they achieved was like a piece of a puzzle falling into place, revealing the full scope of their network and capabilities. They're more sophisticated than we initially realized, Dr. Chen observed, her voice filled with grudging respect for the adversary's technical abilities. The level of coordination and technical expertise required for this operation suggests a state-level actor with significant resources. Or a non-state actor with access to state-level resources, I replied, watching the patterns emerge on our displays. The communication protocols they're using are beyond what most nation-states could develop independently. By 3 p.m., we had achieved something unprecedented in the history of cybersecurity: complete real-time visibility into a major attack as it was being executed. The attackers had successfully established access to 17 different infrastructure systems, believing they were operating covertly while we monitored their every action. Phase 3 is beginning, Sarah Kim announced, her machine learning algorithms identifying the shift in communication patterns. They're moving from reconnaissance to operational deployment. This was the moment of truth. If our analysis was correct, the attackers would now begin coordinating their activities across all compromised systems, creating the perfect opportunity for our counterstrike. If we were wrong, the next few minutes could see widespread infrastructure failures across multiple states. Dr. Torres, initiate the quantum counterstrike protocols, I ordered, my voice steadier than I felt. Sarah, deploy the false command injection system. Major Bradley, coordinate with all agencies for simultaneous defensive actions. The quantum computers began processing the counterstrike algorithms, their calculations operating at speeds that defied human comprehension. On our screens, we could see the false commands being injected into the adversary's network, disguised as legitimate communications that would redirect their operations and ultimately give us control of their entire infrastructure. Injection successful, Dr. Torres announced. The false commands are propagating through their network according to our projections. Confirmed, Sarah Kim added, her algorithms tracking the effects of our counterstrike in real time. They're beginning to receive contradictory orders from their command structure. The confusion is spreading through their entire operation. For the next hour, we watched as the attackers' coordinated assault dissolved into chaos. Their communication systems, compromised by our injected commands, began sending conflicting instructions that disrupted their careful timing and coordination. Systems they had spent months planning to attack simultaneously became isolated from each other, reducing their impact to manageable levels. Major Bradley, what's the status report from the infrastructure companies? I asked, monitoring the defensive measures being implemented across the country. All major utilities report that they've successfully isolated and contained the attempted intrusions. Financial networks are reporting minimal impact, and transportation systems are operating normally. The coordinated attack has been effectively neutralized. But the most satisfying moment came when Dr. Torres announced the success of our ultimate objective. Julie, we've achieved complete control of their command and control infrastructure. We can monitor all their operations and communications indefinitely. The room erupted in celebration as the full implications became clear. We hadn't just defended against a major attack. We had eliminated the threat entirely and gained valuable intelligence about the adversary's capabilities and intentions. Outstanding work, team, Dr. Harrison said, his voice filled with pride and relief. What you've accomplished here will be studied and celebrated for years to come. As the immediate crisis passed, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. Less than 2 months ago, I had been a junior analyst at a government contracting firm, dismissed by my family as someone who spent too much time on computers. Now I had led a task force that had prevented what could have been the most devastating cyber attack in American history. The secure phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was General Webb, calling from the Pentagon. Ms. Rodriguez, I wanted to personally congratulate you on the success of the operation. The President has been briefed on the results, and he specifically asked me to convey his appreciation for your leadership. Thank you, General. It was a team effort, and I couldn't have done it without the exceptional analysts who worked with me. I appreciate your humility, but you should know that your role in this operation has been noted at the highest levels of government. When this operation is declassified, you'll receive the recognition you deserve. But more immediately, I'd like to discuss your future with the Department of Defense. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering opportunities that would have been unimaginable to me just months earlier. Leadership positions at the Pentagon, advisory roles with the National Security Council, and the possibility of heading a new cybersecurity initiative that would revolutionize how the government approached digital threats. After the call ended, I sat quietly in the operations center, surrounded by the equipment and displays that had become my world. The crisis was over, the threat eliminated, and the nation's infrastructure was secure. But more importantly, I had discovered something about myself that I'd never fully realized before. I wasn't just someone who was good with computers. I was a leader, someone who could make life-or-death decisions under pressure and inspire others to achieve extraordinary things. The recognition from senior officials was gratifying, but the real satisfaction came from knowing that I had found my true calling. That evening, as I finally headed home after more than 18 hours in the operations center, I thought about calling my parents to share some version of the day's events. But I realized that their understanding or approval was no longer something I needed. I had found my place in the world, and it was exactly where I belonged. The next few days would bring formal recognition, media attention, and career opportunities that would reshape my entire future. But the most important transformation had already occurred. I had become the person I was always meant to be, and nothing would ever be the same. 2 months after the operation, I found myself standing in the Roosevelt Room of the White House, wearing a navy blue suit that my mother had helped me select during her first visit to Washington. The ceremony was small and classified, attended only by senior administration officials, and the handful of people who knew the full details of what had transpired that November morning. The president himself presented me with the National Security Medal, the highest civilian honor for contributions to national security. As he pinned the medal to my jacket, he spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. "Ms. Rodriguez, what you accomplished quite literally saved this nation from unprecedented chaos. The American people will never know your name, but they owe you a debt that can never be repaid." After the ceremony, I walked through the White House corridors with my parents, who were still struggling to process the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. My father, who had spent years dismissing my work as computer stuff, was unusually quiet as we made our way to the parking area. "Julie," he finally said, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before, "I owe you an apology. I never understood what you were building, what you were capable of. I'm sorry it took something like this for me to see it." My mother reached for my hand, her eyes bright with tears. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. I know we didn't always show it, but we always loved you. We just didn't know how to support something we couldn't understand." The conversation I'd dreamed of having for years was finally happening, but I realized it no longer carried the desperate importance it once had. Their approval was meaningful, but it wasn't the validation I needed to feel complete. I had found that within myself, and in the recognition of people who truly understood my work. "I know you love me," I said, squeezing my mother's hand, "and I love you both. We just needed to learn how to see each other more clearly." Marcus joined us for dinner that evening at a restaurant near the White House, his pride evident in every gesture and word. "I can't believe my little sister is a national hero," he said, raising his glass in a toast. "I always knew you were destined for extraordinary things." The next morning, I drove to the Pentagon for my first day in my new position as Deputy Director of Cybersecurity Operations. The office was larger than any workspace I'd ever had, with windows overlooking the Potomac and walls lined with secure communication equipment that connected me to cybersecurity operations around the world. Dr. Harrison, now my colleague rather than my supervisor, stopped by to welcome me to the role. "How does it feel to be one of the youngest deputy directors in Pentagon history?" he asked with a smile. "Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure," I replied honestly. "But I feel ready for the challenge." "You should. You've already proven yourself in ways that most people never get the chance to. The team you'll be leading is excited to work with you." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of briefings, policy meetings, and strategic planning sessions. I found myself advising senior officials on cyber threats, developing new protocols for national infrastructure protection, and building relationships with international partners who were facing similar challenges. The work was complex and demanding, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Every day brought new problems to solve, new systems to protect, and new opportunities to use my skills in service of something larger than myself. I was no longer the awkward daughter who didn't fit family expectations. I was a leader whose expertise was sought by the most powerful people in government. 3 months into my new role, I received an unexpected call from my old supervisor at Northbrook Security. "Julie, I wanted to congratulate you on your success. We always knew you were special, but what you've accomplished is remarkable." "Thank you. Northbrook gave me the foundation I needed to develop my skills. I'm grateful for the opportunity you provided." "Actually, I'm calling because we've been approached by several major corporations who want to hire you as a consultant. The compensation packages are extraordinary, if you're interested." The offers were tempting, representing financial security beyond anything I'd ever imagined. But as I considered them, I realized that money wasn't what motivated me. The work I was doing at the Pentagon, the opportunity to protect millions of people and shape national security policy, was worth more than any corporate salary. "I appreciate the offers, but I'm exactly where I want to be," I replied. "This work is my calling, not just my career." The conversation reminded me of something General Webb had said during one of our recent meetings. "Julie, you've discovered something that many people never find: the intersection of your talents, your passion, and the world's needs. That's a rare gift." As I sat in my office that evening, reviewing intelligence reports and preparing for the next day's briefings, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The path hadn't been easy, marked by family misunderstanding, professional doubts, and moments of isolation. But every challenge had prepared me for this moment, when I could finally use my skills to their fullest potential. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Saw the news article about the Pentagon's new cybersecurity initiatives. Couldn't name you specifically, but I know my sister is behind the important work happening there. Mom and Dad are bragging about you to everyone in Springfield. I smiled, touched by his support but no longer needing it for validation. The recognition that mattered most came from the work itself, from the knowledge that I was using my talents to protect people and serve my country. The sun was setting over the Potomac, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to analyze, and new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight I felt a deep sense of peace with who I had become and what I had achieved. I was no longer the daughter who would never amount to anything. I was Julie Rodriguez, Deputy Director of Cybersecurity Operations, National Security Medal recipient, and someone who had found her place in the world by following her passion despite the doubts of others. The Pentagon might have called me for emergency orders, but I had been preparing for this moment my entire life, and finally I was exactly where I belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.